Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Rare Earth Industry Association, me, Badrinath Veluri, the acting president for now, this session. And I would like to welcome you all for this webinar session on post-COVID business practices, as we have experienced a very typical and very unforeseen situations in the industrial aspects and in the world today. We would like to conduct this conference, and I would like to introduce REIA, and I also would like to present actually what REIA stands for and where we are placed and how we are going to do and how we are going to support the industry. And along with that, actually, I will give you a short agenda on what we are going to do today in this webinar. Rare Earth Industry Association, which we call it as a REIA in short, as an abbreviated form, founded in 2019 in June. So we have 1-year-old association. We are very young in the industry, but we are trying to do our best actually how we can cope up with the industrial aspects and our needs for the industrial members. We started with 11 members in 2019 in June. Today we are 32 members from all the segments of all the rare earth elements value chain. So we are growing, and we are going with a good pace. And apart from that, actually, I would like to introduce you actually what REIA stands for and what's our mission and why we are placed and what are the various aspects we would like to address. REIA would be an industrial organization on a global level with a European foundation, and REIA aims to develop a balanced and a global stakeholder network. So this is one of our important vision actually, to grow on a global aspect and to bring all the stakeholders that are using the rare earth elements in terms of either upstream or downstream in the value chain. We would like to support the sustainability aspects when we call these rare earth elements are utilized in the green transition aspects and in various energy savings or various sustainable applications. It's also very important that the value chains needs to be sustainable, which is very thin today in the current industry. So REIA aims to develop such kind of platforms where we can have all these aspects included. And at the same time, when sustainability should be an inclusive factor, the transparency has to be on top of everything. And it is one of the aligned factors that needs to be addressed. And REIA would like to create a process of and a platform for transparency. And REIA would like to be a certifying body, a neutral and industrial certifying body for the various processes within the REIA industry. On top of all these things, we would like to have 3 pillars of this association. One is the stakeholder network, the research analysis, and then the strategic solutions that are putting all these things together. So the focus areas which we would like to develop in this forum, in this association, are one is the sustainability platforms that addressing the blockchain aspects and the sustainability frameworks. As of today, as I mentioned before, that actually the rare earth elements are very thin in terms of addressing the sustainability factors. So we would like to have much more focus on this. As of today, we don't have a framework, and we would like to participate in this kind of activities in building the framework, collecting all the aspects of what today happening within the industry, either from the downstream or from the upstream aspects. And at the same time, we would also like to create a platform for the scientific and technological perspective where the global stakeholders can address the various aspects and build their networks in those perspectives. Coming back, and with all these aspects and mission, it is very clear that actually REIA has actually a very important role in the industry, bringing the entire value chain together, where you could also see that actually how today's presentations are made and what are the various presenters are going to bring together to this industry. And today's agenda, I would like to present. I don't want to take much more time because we have only two hours. So it's very important that actually we need to have everything to be addressed here. We have 15 minutes of each session where we are having 5 speakers from different areas where we'll be having different topics. And you will be having 5 minutes of question and answer sessions. If not, actually, you can always address the things actually offline to the Secretary Nabeel, And at the end, actually, we also have 15 minutes, 20 minutes of wrap-up session for the discussions. So I would, with this short introduction, I would like to leave the stage and give the presenters a chance to have actually the presentation. Thank you very much, everyone, and I wish everyone will enjoy this webinar session. Have a nice day.
Thanks, Badri. So we will go to the first presenter, Reinout. And Reinout is from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and he'll give a presentation on the material criticality, climate change, and the impact of COVID on these aspects. Thank you, Reinout, for joining. Please go ahead.
Thanks a lot for having me. A quick introduction from my side. My name is Reinout De Clercq. I'm a director within the sustainability practice of PwC. I'm based in Brussels, and I lead the responsible sourcing and sustainable value chain practice of PwC Europe. Throughout the presentation, I will give a quick highlight on the short-term to-dos in view of COVID and sustainability, and then I will basically move towards the longer-term impacts of COVID and also in view of sustainability. And I will try to bring it to life through an example of cobalt. So cobalt is not a rare earth mineral, but I think it's a good example of how you can approach sustainable sourcing, sustainable value chain practices from basically compliance to innovation. And it might give some inspiration as well for rare earth minerals. So the first part is basically what I call the direct short-term response towards COVID-19. And logically seen, that's of course focusing on health and safety. Of course, it's about dealing with the challenges of worker redeployment or deployment, ensuring safe accommodation facilities, safety management procedures, transport and logistics. These things will sound very, very basic and common sense, but we do see that companies struggle with it. We had cases of clients where the expats were locked down at the ground, at the mining sites, for example. So it definitely wasn't an easy path in the last months, and it still isn't, because many countries are still in a kind of lockdown. Travel is still much limited. So so if you are still have to resume operations, what I pointed out here are some direct next steps to take when doing that. So it's basically looking at the risks and the preparedness to restart operating, looking at all your SOPs, how you have to change them, and as well how you have to train your employees, and also looking at your HR policies, of course. Once you resume your operations, it's not enough to just work out the measures you have taken, but of course you have to be sure that you can monitor those managers, adapt them, and be agile towards the changing conditions. But this is the direct short-term response, is mainly focusing on health and safety. Now, what is, however, more interesting is what I call the direct long-term response, which is focusing on climate change and on sustainability, on the environmental part of sustainability. Why I call it direct long-term is because if you think about those aspects, climate change, environment, and the like, you're by essence thinking long-term. But I still call it direct because basically you should have started it or should start it as soon as possible. Because as the title is saying, we can't self-isolate from climate change. So basically, we had a pandemic, we still are having a pandemic, and climate change can be a pandemic in the future of another nature. So you should already try to look into what it could mean for your business. I think COVID-19 has shown that various vulnerabilities within value chains, supply chains, within dealing with crises. So we should really learn from it and take those things already up towards the climate change aspects which will come the coming decades. If we look, for example, at the Paris Agreement staying below the 1.5 degrees and the goals which have been set prior to COVID, it meant that we had to decarbonize at 11.3% on an annual basis. The G20 was prior to COVID at 3% on an annual basis. So if we're going to relaunch our economies, we can't basically relaunch it and go back to normal. We should continue to push for this transition. And what you already see is certainly at a European level is towards a push towards a green relaunching of the economies, that the recovery packages will basically get sustainability angles around it or conditions. So this is, of course, something which we have to take into account going forward. Now, if we look at the climate risks in first instance and the rare earths industry, you have the physical risk and the transition risks, but with each risk there is a big opportunity. I don't have to explain you definitely the opportunity side, but looking at, for example, the risks, let's start with the physical risk angle. The use of water, to give an example, the stress on water which will come is something which to the extent possible should already be taken into account today, because in the future water will be a scarce resource. So how water is being treated, as an example, is very important. Another thing is the transition side also has a big risk, because industries, value chains will have to decarbonize the coming decades, which means that everybody across the value chain will start looking at it. And you already see big examples of that towards commitments being taken from companies within automotive, within other sectors and industries, where they have the ambitions to become net zero. Net zero means that every angle basically will have transit. And if you look at the footprint of companies, it's often the biggest impact of companies is sitting within the supply chain. So basically, transitions to net zeros by ambitions and actions being taken by companies downstream will trickle down the value chain fully until upstream. So that's something to consider. However, the transition to a low carbon economy is of course a big opportunity, as you know, for rare earths. And this transition will of course create a demand, a supply chain dilemma, stress. However, we have to be sure that these demand is then being met in a sustainable way and a responsible way. So besides climate change and decarbonizing every step across the value chain, it's also, of course, the more social, human rights, ethical practices which have to be taken into account. And that's why we also see key developments in that area. But now, which is a bit more interesting, I think, and more practical, I will try to bring this to life through the example of cobalt. As I said, it's not a rare earth mineral, but it can give you a good example. Because if you look, for example, today at cobalt, if you look at what is required, what is needed to be compliant, what you have to do basically to be able to operate, you have to basically comply with what we call the typical compliance obligations. Export controls, bribery, corruption, VAT, AML, those typical compliance obligations, which are typically managed by the legal departments and the compliance departments within companies. So if you look at all minerals and metals, basically only 3TG, tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold have more than this to the conflict minerals regulation embedded in Dodd-Frank and the upcoming EU conflict minerals regulations. We, however, see that the various regulators are starting to look at other minerals and metals, and which is in first instance was cobalt. They're also looking at mica, graphite, lithium, and it's of course expected that they will not stop there, and more minerals and metals will come on the radar of regulators. So that's why what you have already seen in the case of cobalt, although from a compliance perspective, you don't have to do more than the compliance. Today, within the cobalt value chain, you are moved towards the obligation. That's what you are expected to do. So what is expected is that regardless of where you are in the value chain, that you do screen your supply chain on human rights issues, on environmental risks, and that you basically get a good understanding of where your risks are and what you're sourcing, that you know the materials you're sourcing, that you know from who you're sourcing it, and also that you have a good view on the dependency and how it puts stress on the other angles of your sourcing practices. The OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chain of minerals from conflict affected and high risk areas, although it is focusing on the conflict minerals, the OECD is very clear. This is a standard and a guideline which is applicable for all minerals and metals. So including cobalt, including rare earth, including lithium, you name it. And what you see in all those industries is that more and more you have certification systems like the Responsible Minerals Initiative, the LBMA has guidelines, or Responsible Jewelry Council. So those things are what we call expected to do. However, within cobalt, various companies are progressing across this maturity journey, and they are now in what we call the efficiency, what is smart to do, where of course industry collaboration is smart. Please avoid that mining sites are being audited 20 times by different customers, which are basically at the end for 90% auditing the same. So set up industry certification schemes. What you also see within cobalt, you have better mine programs. That's an example of Trafigura and Shemaf. You have various actors around the value chain, like the example you see here, BMW, BASF, Samsung, joining together in developing sustainable cobalt mining projects. Another example here within Smart to Do is what is the Umicore Sustainable Cobalt Procurement Framework, which goes beyond basically the ISO certification schemes which you have under obligation to do. So it's aiming at the same thing. It's screening your supply chain base and responding to the risks and red flags and orange flags you identify. But in this Umicore case, they go beyond those schemes. Now, another one, which is of course where you're really thinking long term, here in the case of cobalt, is what we call the innovation programs, where you have an example of a circular economy. So Umicore made it public that together with Audi, they are setting up a scheme to basically recollecting the discarded batteries, to recycle them, and then basically feed them back into the value chain, into at the end new batteries. Another example of very interesting innovation is the battery passport they are creating, and that's an initiative by the World Economic Forum and the Global Battery Alliance. As well, what you see within the value chain is low carbon initiatives. So basically decarbonizing the value chain from upstream to downstream, trying to decarbonize the value chain, and then link it with product sustainability, so that the end product can show how sustainable it is, how much it is contributing to the low carbon economy. Quickly looking at time, so that means my time is up now. This was very fast, I realize. So I'm open for questions, I would say.
Okay, thank Reinout. It was a very good presentation, giving an overall view of what is happening, especially in Europe after the COVID, and on the criticality. And is anyone have any questions? Please go ahead. We can have the questions now.
This is Badri here. Can I ask a question, Rain?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's good that actually you address the cobalt, which is also having a very dirty image. How you correlate that actually towards the rare earths? Because as I said in the initial phase of this webinar, the sustainability is thinly stitched towards the rare earths. How you see it?
Yeah, that's true. Every minerals and metals value chain has clear sustainability issues. So as you as well said, one is pinpointing where the key issue is. Is it at mine side? Is it refiner side? What there the particular issue is? And for example, in the case of cobalt, the biggest issue is child labor, which is linked with ASM. So basically, that's why in the examples I gave, you have examples of trying to deal with ASM. But what is as well very important is that creating transparency and traceability systems. Because as long as you can't ensure downstream that the responsible mined minerals and metals are finding its way throughout the value chain without being mixed with the irresponsible, you will have an industry with problems downstream. So you have to find a combination of tackling the issues which are different depending on where you are in the value chain, setting up programs to manage those and to basically make them responsible. And then you need to add on a layer of traceability to basically that at the end consumer and the downstream companies, they are able to differentiate the, let's call them the good from the bad sources.
Thank you very much, Reinout. Actually, this is exactly what I was mentioning before. When REIA was founded, the downstream players plays a major role in establishing the sustainability guidelines across the value chain. And it's a clear message from your side, actually, and I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Could you comment on the long-term availability of cobalt? I don't really see how anything that you talked about addresses that issue. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So long-term availability is of course something to look at, and that's why there is always. That's why circular economy is a very interesting concept, because it will, besides the virgin materials, it will create a new stream of materials. So setting up circular economy models will be a key part to deal with the supply-demand pressure which might be there. So that's one. And of course, what you also see if for example, let's say cobalt, if there would be a lack in supply-demand, you of course will see technology development pushing towards other types of batteries with potentially less cobalt. So that's also what you're already seeing today, by the way, that the use of cobalt per battery is decreasing. However, looking at the forecast, the supply-demand issue is still being foreseen.
I think I have another comment actually, rather than just actually a question. It's again, when it comes to the circular economy implementation, again, the downstream players plays a major role. And again, transparency has to be stitched together. And again, the downstream players plays a major role. So it's very clear, and it's very a very important message from your presentation, which I could see is actually downstream players has a major stake in aligning the principles of sustainability to what they're putting into the market as green technologies.
Yeah, fully cannot agree less with that, of course.
Hi, Nabeel, Ryan, Castilloux here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Just a quick question from my side. I'm just wondering if you have an opinion on why cobalt receives so much attention with respect to the environmental and social issues that it presents relative to something like rare earths. Is it primarily, as you mentioned, because of the child labor and all of the publicity that gets, or is there anything else that you see that really makes it such a priority versus rare earths in basically the same supply chains?
Yeah, so if you look at cobalt and when it got a lot of attention, it all started with Amnesty International. Amnesty International, they published a huge campaign a couple of years ago around child labor and the issues within the cobalt value chain. And it was with clips and videos of real child labor. So one of the worst forms of human rights abuses. And that basically triggered a lot of additional attention. So the Washington Post started picking it up, other news media starting picking it up. And as well, what you saw in the Transparency International campaign, they visualized a value chain where they were able to show across the value chain from mining until the downstream companies, including some of the big OEMs and electronic giants, really naming them and shaming them. And that's how it all got a lot of attention. So it started with one big campaign at the end.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. With respect to rare earth, there's also been campaigns in recent years that really focus on the historical environmental devastation that's been done in China. And I think those have also gotten a lot of attention and are well known. But because they tend to really focus only on the environmental aspects, it seems that they've just largely been ignored. So I think perhaps that really speaks to the appetite of government, or not government rather, but business towards cleaning up their supply chains, where social aspects are much more prioritized at this point in time than environmental related ones.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because the social parts, they basically attack the brand value. They're really, from a reputational value, they really attack the brand value. The environmental issues should also do that, but yeah, it's not to the same extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, okay, so we are a bit late, and I have a couple of questions on the question panel on the comment box, but I will raise it towards the end during the discussion. Otherwise, we may get leave. And so, thank you, Reinout, for joining. So and you know, we may have a few questions more during the discussion towards the end of the program. And now I invite Yamane-san.
Thank you for inviting this conference. It's great pleasure to join this conference. I'm Atsushi Yamane from NEDO. I will talk about the NEDO's projects for the circular economy. And today I will talk about what NEDO is, and then I would like to share the NEDO's project for the circular economy, and then what we are going to do in the future with the coronavirus situation. First of all, NEDO is a new energy and industrial technology development organization, and then we are cooperate with the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and then NEDO is one of the biggest R&D management organization. We cooperate with the industrial university or public research institute. We make the technology strategy or make new project or manage that project. Annually, we have the approximately 1.43 billion US dollars. And then we covered a wide range of areas, as you can see at the bottom of this slide. And we covered, except for the nuclear and space development. And now we'll talk about the 3 technologies today. And then let me introduce our project. This is when we look at the recycle system background, we still have so many issues on the supply chains. For example, when we produce the products, most of products are not designed for the recycle or environment, and then it's also difficult to collect e-waste from the consumers, and then also when we like to recycle the e-waste, it's still difficult to recycle commercially. Actually, in Japan, it's only a few metals elements are recycled, such as iron, copper, or gold, silver, platinum, something like that. And then the other, most of all rare earths is going to the roadbed. So now we need to change this situation, or actually we need to develop some technology for that, for solve the situation. So let me introduce our technology development. Actually, this is a long time ago project. As you can see on the right side, the rare earth element price, it rapidly grow up in the 2011 to 2012, such as neodymium or cerium, something like that. And then in that situation, we launched a new project for neodymium magnets. However, when the rare metal price goes down, the significance of the operating such kind of recycle system is diminished, and then the number of recycle plants stops after the rare metal price goes down. So I don't think this project goes very well. So we learned from this project. So when we in order to realize sustainable recycle system, we need to take care of 2 points. The first one is the development of unmanned plants, which is the recycle cost is consists of the manual labor cost is the almost 50% of the recycle cost. So we need to reduce the cost. We have to build the unmanned plants for the comprehensively recovering the metals. It's not for the only one metals. We need to look at other metals, not only the high price metals, but also the others. So at the same time, the second point is the building a strategic metal recycling system. So it's we have to do the look at the supply chain, whole supply chain. So this is the our new image of the next generation metal circulation system. And here's the detail of the system. Now we launched this project in 2017 to build the unmanned recycle system. So this project focusing on the developing a recycle system for the e-waste, such as smartphones or tablets or digital cameras. So when we look at this system, there's it contains 3 systems. The first blue square shows the automation, dismantling, and sorting for e-waste, which is which starts individual separation, such as like it is the iPhone 7 or iPhone 10 or something like that. And then the second step is automatic dismantling. When we comes to the device, it separates each part. It's such kind of printed circuit board or battery or others. And then after this blue circle, blue square, it goes to the red square, which is the selective crushing and sorting for the printed circuit board. When it comes to the red square process, the printed circuit board, the parts on the printed circuit board removed from the board and then separate each parts. And then each parts will be separated for the each element to be recycled. So after physical separation, it goes to the third process, which is highly efficient smelting. There are two types of the smelting method we have developing so far. So this is the what we are doing for recycling all metals containing in the e-waste. But we also have to also focus on the information management, because in order to operate this amount recycling system, it needs information to dismantle the smartphones or tablets or something like that, because without the information, it's very dangerous to crash the products. So, and also what kind of elements are contained is also the important information. Therefore, we need to focusing on the information management system. So this is the new concept of the our project. This is the information management system. But this project has not been launched yet. I mean, we wish to build this new project for next year. And then what we are hoping to is the three points as shown here. One is the technology development for the information management, such as design information, how to share the design information to the reuse or maintenance or recycle. And then second point is the how product design information improves the recyclability, which means when the information shared with the recycle system, how could the recyclability is improved? And then finally, it's the most important part is the sustainable business model. Is this model could be the commercial or not? It is supposed to be commercial to be sustainable. So we hope to build this project, and then would like to look to it. So based on this discussion, what we can do for the future, I actually organized what happened in the COVID-19 changed in the industry or society. On the left hand, there's three shocks I picked. There's a demand is going down and supply stops, or finance, in terms of finance, investment goes down. On the other hand, new three trends shows up, I think. For example, digital transformation, or sustainability, or decentralization. In these new trends, when we look at the sustainability, resilient supply chain is the most key point. So now the importance of the resilient supply chain is rapidly grow. So we need to make the strategy and action for the achieving low cost and strong supply chain simultaneously. For example, resource minimization or design for environment, or we can apply the new energy, not for fossil fuel, to the renewable energy or something like that. In order to achieve this goal, we have to deal with such kind of new technology or new activity. Especially for the resource minimization, we need to focus on the 3R and plus technology, such as refurbishing or remanufacturing technologies. Or in order to promote the refurbishing or remanufacturing, when we produce the product, the design has to be designed for 3 hours or something like that. So recently, NEDO announced our new vision as shown here. There is a 3 system for sustainable society we announced. There is a circular society or bio society or energy society. This is our concept for the future. And then when we look at the sustainability, we are always focusing on the recycle or 3Rs or circular economy, but also we have to look at the bio or new energy field. So these 3 new society will have to collaborate each other and then make it a sustainable society in the future. Thank you. I think it's about time and then open for the discussion.
Thank you, Yamane-san. A very nice presentation. And okay, we can have quick questions for 5 minutes.
Your presentation was really clear, but
thank you.
Today, what I'm afraid, we try from Valeo, we are building electrical motors for cars. It's unfortunately impossible to collect the waste.
Mm-hmm.
This is a big point. I don't know if you face the same in Japan.
Oh, I mean, in this figure, it's hard to collect from the consumers, right?
Were you able to put in place the collect of all electrical motors that contains rare earths? And how did you do that?
Oh, I see. Actually, Japan is the role to collect the small electronic devices, but it still have some difficulties to collect the small electronic devices. The reason is, I guess, the recycle for the electronic devices is not so commercial so far, because of the recycle cost is very expensive. So no one wants to deal with such kind of recycle business. That is a reason to to be a difficulty to collect the small electronic devices, I guess.
I think so also. It's the same in Europe.
Thank you.
But will the Japanese government push in order to increase this recycling?
Yes, of course. Because there's some it's always be a problem, such kind of lithium-ion battery gets fire anywhere. It's very dangerous recently. So also yeah, it is one of the reasons recently the Japanese government is focusing on the collecting small electronic devices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Nabeel, Dan Mcgroarty from the panel, I have a question.
Yep, okay, yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Yamane, very helpful, and thank you for sharing your viewpoint with the panel. I found it very interesting. I wanted your thoughts and your opinion on one question. If you look at the recycling, dealing with the products after they end their useful life, if you go back to the way device engineers design the products, is there more that there always is, but what are your thoughts on what device engineers can do to make the end life recycling easier. And I'm thinking particularly about, say, cell phones, small devices, where each unit is very, very small, but collectively it's a massive amount of potential material. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I still don't have the clear answer, but one big key point is the battery. Its battery is also causing the problem, and then when taking the battery from the smartphone is one of the most dangerous process in the recycle system. So we also have to talk to the manufacturer company, or also we like to talk to the Japanese government to make some kind of guidelines or something to promote the circular economy system.
Thank you very much.
This is Badri. Can I put a comment to your question, Dan?
Of course, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course.
Yeah. Basically, there are two things actually which are very important when we talk about the circular economy. One is actually till today, the downstream players are hunting behind actually only one thing, which is cost.
Mm-hmm.
The cost turns towards the negative side, towards the low end side. We will just leave all the circular economy aspects, and we will leave all the 3 R's, whatever it is. We use as much as what we can. We don't think about actually remanufacturing. We don't think about actually recycling and how to collect the end of life products. Second thing is, in order to implement this very successfully, till today, we have been focusing on how to increase the reliability of the components and how to design the components for manufacturing, not for design the components for remanufacturing or disassembling. So this is what actually we are getting actually a big hurdle today, because being as one of the downstream product manufacturer, we could see that actually that this is, so the trend has to change somehow, that the downstream players, again, as the previous presentation also highlighted, the downstream players has to take the initiative to see how the design for manufacturing has to be stitched, so that you access these critical materials in your product very easily. So these are the few things which needs to be addressed, because there are readily available methods actually. Once if you have collected these critical material components, you can easily recycle them and you can easily reuse them. The only problem is accessing them in the components is actually one of the biggest challenge today.
I see. Thank you for comment, and I think I will add some comment too. And this is a kind of image what we hope to be, and then this is the circular economy system, and then we need to be a commercial sustainable system. It has to be a commercial sustainable system, and then also the recycler will be comfortable to deal with the eco design product, but also our supplier also recently focusing on the sustainability or SDGs. So they can be working together. So we would like to promote such kind of opportunities or chance.
Thank you, Yamane-san, for a nice presentation. Now I invite Ryan Castilloux. He is the Managing Director of Adamas Intelligence, a consultancy company based in Amsterdam and Canada, and also who produce annual reports and weekly, monthly reports on rare earth elements, and also on battery materials like lithium, graphite, and cobalt. So he has a long history of working on this critical material area, and working with the downstream as well as upstream companies.
Thank you, Nabeel. Thanks for
always, yeah, and his reports are reference point for many. You could see, all his reports in public newspapers and globally well-known agency for the information related to rare earths. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, good morning, afternoon, and evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be virtually here with you this morning at my end here in Canada. Thank you sincerely to the REIA team for organizing today's event and for inviting me to speak on behalf of Adamas Intelligence. Today, I will be sharing some findings from an upcoming report that we'll be releasing later this month, titled Rare Earth Magnet Market Outlook to 2030. And this report provides a comprehensive deep dive into the global rare earth magnet industry and contains detailed forecasts for future supply and demand of neodymium iron boron alloys, powders, magnets, as well as the rare earth elements that they contain. I'll take a moment at the start of the presentation to quickly tell you a little bit more about Adamas Intelligence for anyone who's not entirely familiar, after which I'll spend a couple of minutes discussing the impact that we expect COVID to have on demand in the near term. Then, with that bad news behind us, I'll dive into the much more positive outlook that we foresee for long-term electric vehicle demand and the magnets that they contain. Following the above, I'll briefly summarize some other interesting takeaways from the upcoming Rare Earth Magnet Market Outlook report, and then would be glad to take any questions or comments that you may have. So as you may be aware, Adamas Intelligence is an independent research and advisory firm that was founded in 2012 to help clients make informed decisions involving strategic metals and material sectors, such as rare earth elements, as well as battery metals and minerals. Our clients include exploration and mining companies, institutional investors, technology and materials developers, government agencies, as well as other advisory firms. And despite being a relatively young company, I'm proud to say that we serve clients on 6 continents from 2 locations in Canada. In terms of our products and services, we publish and sell reports. We offer a variety of different subscription services that I'll quickly tell you about in a moment. And we also regularly complete custom consulting projects to address client-specific needs. In terms of our reports, we regularly author reports and studies on issues related to rare earths, some examples of which are shown here, and also publish monthly subscription-based reports that analyze the global electric vehicle battery and motor industries, or track global consumption of battery metals and materials like lithium, cobalt, and nickel each and every month as it happens. And lastly, in addition to these subscription-based monthly reports, we also have visual analytics platforms that subscribers can access for tracking deployment of electric vehicle battery capacity, deployment of battery metals and materials, as well as the competitive landscapes of cell suppliers and cell chemistries on an ongoing basis. All right, so with that introduction behind us, let's now take a look at what is expected for 2020 neodymium iron boron magnet demand in light of the ongoing negative effects of the coronavirus globally. Well, after growing at a compound annual growth rate of approximately 6% from 2015 through 2019, we project that global demand for sintered and bonded neodymium iron boron magnets will collectively fall by 11% year over year in 2020 as the ongoing effects of the coronavirus shutdowns and stay-at-home orders continue to weigh heavily on consumer, commercial, and industrial spending. In 2020, we expect magnet demand to drop across nearly all end-use categories, as we can see in the chart on the right, although some categories are expected to do better than others. Consumer electronics, for example, are expected to fare relatively well in 2020, with global unit sales expected to collectively fall by just 2% year over year, while overall magnet demand for the category increases by 7% year over year. This increase is being driven largely by a shift from the office to now working from home for millions of employees globally, which has created an unexpected surge in sales of laptops, tablets, smart speakers, and displays, translating to increased demand for magnets used in loudspeakers, hard disk drives, and other components. On the other side of the spectrum, we expect that passenger electric vehicle traction motors will be the worst performing end-use category of 2020, with magnet demand expected to fall by upwards of 30% this year as global electric vehicle sales continue to underperform. So far, through the first 5 months of 2020, electric vehicle sales in Asia Pacific were down 30% year over year. In the Americas, they were down 19% year over year. And in Europe, where EV demand growth has persisted most, EV sales were up just 13% year over year through the first 5 months of 2020. Despite the negative outlook for magnet demand growth in 2020, we expect demand to bounce back strongly in 2021 as well as 2022 as key demand markets continue to reopen and retail store closures and consumer stay-at-home orders are eased. Thereafter, we expect demand to grow strongly at a CAGR, a compound annual growth rate of 8% through 2030 on the back of strong demand growth for neomagnets in nearly all end-use categories, and particularly for the lowermost category shown on the chart, which is permanent or passenger electric vehicle traction motors, a topic that I will now expand on a bit further. So again, despite the negative outlook for passenger vehicle sales and specifically for passenger electric vehicle sales in 2020, we project that the market will recover swiftly in 2021 and 2022, making up some lost ground, and thereafter will grow steadily through the end of the decade to approximately 90 million units per annum. Over that same period, we forecast that the market penetration of electric vehicles in all regions globally will continue to accelerate, as we see in the bottom right corner. And this will translate into global electric vehicle sales of 14 million units per annum in 2025 and 35 million units per annum in 2030. As we can see in the chart on the right side of the slide, we expect that battery electric vehicles will increasingly absorb market share from hybrid electric vehicles in the years ahead. And this will have important implications for magnet demand per electric vehicle going forward, given that battery electric vehicles tend to use more powerful traction motors than hybrid electric vehicles, and thereby use a greater mass of magnets per electric vehicle on average. As we can see in this chart, the global sales weighted average electric vehicle motor power in kilowatts has been increasing overall since at least 2015, as battery electric vehicle sales growth has consistently outpaced that of hybrid electric vehicles, which again tend to use lower powered motors than battery electric vehicles. And since permanent magnet traction motors are used in over 90% of all electric vehicles produced each year, the outcome of this rising motor power in recent years has been rising magnet use per electric vehicle, as we can see in the chart on the right, which is a trend that we expect to continue in the years ahead. Overall, with electric vehicle sales and magnet use per electric vehicle projected to rise in tandem, we forecast that total neodymium iron boron magnet demand for passenger electric vehicle traction motors will rise at a compound annual growth rate of 29% from 2020 through 2030, making passenger electric vehicle traction motors the single largest end-use category of neodymium iron boron magnets by the end of the decade. It's worth noting that our electric vehicle traction motor forecast projects that permanent magnet synchronous motors, PMSMs, will continue to dominate the market over the next decade, but will increasingly lose market share to induction and other motor types after 2025, as higher magnet prices and scarce supplies spur some EV manufacturers to opt for the lower cost performance risk balance of alternative motor types. But wait a minute, if we understand that permanent magnet motors are the most efficient and the most cost-effective motors available, then why exactly might an automaker willingly choose an alternative motor type instead. And I can't presume to speak for any one company in particular, but there are a number of reasons why an induction or alternative motor type could be preferred. Firstly, it could be simply a hedge against the supply risks and cost uncertainties that rare earths present. Secondly, in the case of low-priced urban electric vehicles, it could be that battery range and motor performance are lower priorities than vehicle cost and sticker price. Thirdly, it could simply be that an automaker believes that an alternative motor type can be designed and operated as efficiently or just marginally less efficiently than a comparable permanent magnet motor. Or lastly, it could simply be a combination of all of the above points or a number of others not listed or considered at this time. The bottom line is that as the EV market continues to grow explosively, magnet rare earth supplies will struggle to keep up, pushing at least some segments of the EV market away from permanent magnet motors. I'll take a couple of moments now to summarize some other interesting takeaways from the presentation, after which we'll be more than glad to take any questions or comments that you may have. So overall, from 2020 through 2030, we forecast that global annual demand for magnet rare earth oxides will increase by 150%, requiring a doubling or more of global production over the next decade to keep up. Even with China adding an expected 110,000 tons per annum of total rare earth oxide production by 2030, and with the addition of approximately 65,000 tons per annum of new total rare earth oxide production from outside of China, we expect the market to consistently underproduce magnet rare earth oxides through the second half of the decade. With supplies projected to grow limited and major Chinese producers expected to increasingly absorb formerly external costs associated with waste gas, wastewater, radioactive waste, resource depletion, and land occupation, we expect prices of key magnet rare earths to rise steadily through 2030, incentivizing development of new non-China supply sources. But with China forecasted to maintain a 90% share of global neodymium iron boron production through 2030, the nation is expected to maintain a dominant grip over the most critical link of this vital supply chain into the foreseeable future. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I welcome you to contact us at any time in the future to explore any of these topics further, and I look forward to taking any questions or comments that you may have. Thanks again.
Thanks, Ryan. Very good presentation. Anyone question? Anyone from the panel or from the audience?
Yeah, thanks for the quick presentation, Ryan. You said that you expect the use of permanent magnets in electric vehicles, so the use of magnets in electric vehicles to move away from permanent magnets because just a mismatch between the production rate and demand. How confident are you of that?
Yeah, great question. I think to phrase it as the industry moving away from permanent magnets is not entirely accurate in our point of view. So we expect that permanent magnet traction motors will remain the dominant traction motor type used by industry into the foreseeable future. But we anticipate that dominant market share of somewhere between 80 and 90% today will decrease to the 70 to 80% range over the next decade. The reason for that is multifaceted. So one is simply that the market, the EV market itself, is expected to grow tremendously from a couple of million units per annum today to upwards of 30 million units per annum by 2030. With that growth, we're going to have the separation of different niches or different segments within the EV industry, and we already have many of these segments today, but I think that segmentation will become more pronounced. And for low-priced urban electric vehicles that are designed and intended to be used within city limits, where battery range is not a major consideration, we think that the lower cost performance risk balance of alternative motor types like induction or others could become preferred. So in those instances, that's where we would see the industry moving towards alternative motor types. Beyond that, if we just kind of look holistically at where the trend is going and the decrease in magnet usage, it's also going to be constrained by the availability of supplies. So even in this scenario where we envision 110,000 tons of new production per annum coming from China and 60 to 70,000 tons outside of China developed by 2030, we still anticipate that not being enough to meet demand going forward. So that's going to create a constraint whereby even if industry wanted to unanimously use permanent magnet motors, they likely wouldn't have access to the supplies that they wanted, or would have to compete with other end-use categories and thereby contribute towards boosting prices. So I think there's many things contributing towards that, but ultimately we are confident the trend will decrease slightly, but those permanent magnet motors will remain the dominant technology.
Yeah, thank you. Dan Mcgroarty with a question for you, Ryan. It's a marvel to me, the models and the complexity that you must have to maintain in order to forward project the way you do with so much success. So I have a question for what I guess maybe one variable as you look at these things. You know, part of it is you're looking at consumer demand and kind of the uptake of EVs, and another part is the production cost of the magnets themselves in moving them into the motors and the applications. How do you factor for material science advances for the technology advances, and do you see a way in which the price pressures and the supply pressures change the way that the NdPr DyTb mix takes place? It just strikes me as you know, that may kick in the latter half of this decade. How do you look at that?
Yeah, great question. Most definitely, we take that into account. So we not only kind of cast forward what we think will happen, but we also take a look back at what we believe has happened historically. And with respect to kind of those innovations in magnet materials, we do see that there's been an overall steady kind of decline in dysprosium and terbium concentrations on average in magnets in response to two things: to China's dominance of supply of those materials, and also to the price uncertainty and just overall high prices that those rare earths bear. So looking forward, we think that trend is going to continue. So we will continue to see thrifting of dysprosium and terbium in magnets to the benefit of neodymium and praseodymium, which will see their concentrations rise. However, there is a ceiling on that thrifting. So without some very wild and costly innovations whereby we're really reducing the grain size of magnets in order to kind of outright get rid of heavy rare earths, we're still going to need heavy rare earths in magnets going forward. And when we look at the unit demand growth that we see for EVs, for wind power, for other applications of high-grade permanent magnets that contain heavy rare earths, that thrifting is going to be overcome by the strong unit growth, and we will still have ultimately very strong demand growth for dysprosium and terbium going forward. On the other side of the coin, we also consider what the outcome will be as magnet rare earth supplies become increasingly scarce going forward, meaning that the industry will not have the quantity of neodymium iron boron that it wants, and may have to look at other material innovations where they're potentially substituting cerium and lanthanum for some portion of neodymium and praseodymium in the magnets to help balance the overall equation of rare earths, but also to help fill in that gap of short supplies. So we kind of consider it from all angles, and we think that those innovations will play a role going forward, and we've certainly seen that they have historically.
Is in your presentation also included new activities concerning recycling of material?
A great question again. It's something we consider, but within the next 10 years, our view is that it's not going to play a major role as a contributor of supply. As we move into the 2030 to 2050 timeframe, when we will have much more electric vehicles coming to end of life, and a much greater quantity of wind turbines and other large mass end uses of permanent magnets coming to end of life, then we think recycling stands to play a greater role on the supply side. With the models that were shown today and that are presented in the upcoming report, the time horizon is really out to 2030, where we think the economics will remain very challenging for rare earth recycling.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan, can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Badri.
Yeah, this is Badri here. Ryan, my question is actually, you projected that actually there is going to be a reduction in use of permanent magnet motors in the automotive sector.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that actually you're also working on other materials like battery materials and copper also. So how you see that actually? Because if a permanent magnet motor comparison with the induction motor,
mm-hmm.
it uses 3 times less than the copper.
Mm-hmm.
And the silicon steels actually also has a major role. So how you see these things?
Yeah, so there definitely is interactions between, the choices one may make on the motor side and the implications that can have on the battery side. I think often when looking at EVs and material demands for EVs, it's easy to throw batteries and motors into individual silos and to ignore the impact that one has on another. By all means, as the industry adopts, or if an automaker is to adopt a less efficient motor type, be it induction or otherwise, that's going to translate into a reduced vehicle range, a reduced amount of miles or kilometers per charge that vehicle can now deliver. And if the automaker's intent is to compete with other EVs on the market to compete on range, then they now consequently need to increase the capacity of that battery to do so, and that comes at a very substantial cost. We don't necessarily anticipate this being a major challenge because we think a large portion of the automakers that opt to use alternative motor types going forward will do so for applications like urban EVs, where driving range is not the ultimate priority, where sticker price and having a low cost vehicle is number one. If indeed shortages of rare earths then force automakers that don't necessarily want to use alternative motor types to do so, that's when we would expect to see implications on battery demand like lithium, nickel, and cobalt, because those automakers would then need to increase their battery capacity by 5 to 15%, translating to hundreds or upwards of $1,000 to do so for the vehicle system cost.
So this means actually still they are thinking in a silo way. Motor as a separate unit and battery as a separate unit, not as a single unit.
It could be that some are, but I think that others are recognizing that again, that vehicle range and motor performance are not as important for a small car that will be driving through Paris as it is for a German-made beast that's cruising down the Autobahn. So I think different priorities contribute towards that motor selection choice.
Thank you, Badri, for the question, and thank you, Ryan, for an excellent presentation and the question answers. Now I invite our next speaker, actually a REIA Board of Director, Janice Zinck from Natural Resources Canada.
So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody is staying well and during this difficult time. Thank you very much to Nabeel and to REIA organizers for the opportunity to present to you today. I'm going to give a bit of an update on what's happening in Canada in terms of critical minerals, and talk a bit more specifically about the Critical Minerals Task Force and some very relevant programs that we have ongoing now in Canada. So I think there are 2 main aspects for Canada that we're focusing on in the critical mineral space. The first is looking at the transformation of our complex mineral inventory, our rich mineral deposits, into critical materials, all the way across the various value chains. And the other, equally as important as we've heard today, is ensuring that the processes and practices that are in place in Canada are environmentally sound. So where we see the vision for Canada in critical mineral space is one where we have competitive supply chains for critical minerals, that we were also producing value-added products have strong processes and technologies, and most importantly, I think that we are providing a secure and responsible source and supply of minerals and metals for the low carbon and digital economy. So, and no surprise to anyone that Canada is rich in minerals and metals, and we have a very diversified minerals and metals sector. We are certainly a leading mining nation, and we are having strong investment to this day in terms of our projects going forward. So right now we're looking at about $72 billion investment from the private sector into mining projects. We have approximately 108 new projects that are coming on stream now. Many of these are critical mineral projects. We have many projects in nickel and cobalt. You know, Canada, I think, is the second largest producer of cobalt next to the DRC. Graphite is very strong in Canada as well, fourth in global production with 14 advanced projects. And lithium, a number of advanced projects there. And the rare earths, we have 16 advanced projects in that space. So what is the strategic opportunity for Canada? You know, we're seeing a number of our allied partners coming to Canada looking for, I said, responsible, robust, and secure supply chains of critical minerals. So Canada sees an opportunity to be that supplier of trust and to be able to be a contributor across those global supply chains. A couple of the areas that we're focused on is building that downstream. We've heard that already today about the importance of downstream, the downstream pull from the upstream. And these are the various different value chains that we're looking at: aerospace and defense, the EV, energy storage, SMRs, and also, of course, a number of renewable and clean tech applications. Most people are also aware that Canada recently announced the formation of a critical minerals task force, and this task force is across the government of Canada, looking at integration of all the different departments into developing the strategy around critical minerals. So the first is looking at a competitive critical minerals value chains in Canada, as I've noted, positioning Canada as that supplier of choice and value-added product generator with our international allied partners, and also being looking at, I said, the digital low-carbon economy and how we play into that. Some areas of work that are currently underway are looking at the market studies. So certainly we've been working closely with Ryan on a number of those, industry engagement, engagement across our governments, and work with other governments, both domestically and internationally, and ultimately to build that Canadian critical minerals strategy that's forthcoming. Areas of priority for this task force are defining criticality, the competitive advantage opportunities, economic and national security, and in international and domestic engagement, as well as innovation. I'll focus a bit more of my time on innovation, since it's sort of my area of expertise. But just to update on what we're doing in terms of criticality, we're very close now to finalizing the Canadian list of critical minerals. And that list is in draft form right now, undergoing further review, and ultimately will be socialized through a number of engagement and outreach exercises where we'll seek input on that list. So that will be released in the coming months. In terms of competitiveness and advantages, I think it's important Canada is looking at how that we can best position its resources across the full value chain to be able to have strong competitive advantage for the value chain partners and companies that are engaged in those different value chains and intersect between those different value chains. And us also in terms of economic and national security, what are the threats that need to be addressed, and how do we mitigate any risks regarding supply chain disruption? In terms of, I'll talk briefly about international, domestic, and innovation. Ultimately, we see that Canada sees it a very important part of building those supply chains is looking at the domestic and international engagement and having that integration across those value chains with various different parties and partners. in terms of innovation, I think it's very important for us to build our expertise and share that expertise. And I'll talk briefly about a number of projects. Internationally, we've been working through bilateral and multilateral collaboration with the US, EU, Australia, and Japan mainly. Most people are aware that we've launched the US-Canada Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals, having our second plenary discussion this past June to talk about advances in a number of different working areas. As noted, we're a member of REIA, and we've been actively participating on ISO TC 298 and are developing a number of joint R&D activities in the international space. In industry-wise, we have a strong and emerging industry base in critical minerals, and it's important to see that engagement when we build our strategy in Canada, that the industry is there at the table in order to ensure that the strategy that's developed is aligned with the opportunities and the priorities for the industry. So we've recently held an industry day, and that industry day we heard from our industrial stakeholders, and what we heard was that it's time is now for us to be able to advance and to seize the day and capitalize on the opportunity that's in front of us right now. Also, we need to look at investment in the various projects that are in Canada and how to connect those with different value chains, whether they be fully in Canada or again with allied partners. And what are some of those incentives that the government needs to put in place in order to support this industry? In terms of innovation, we have a number of projects or programs that are underway. The one that I'll note now is the rare earth element R&D program that's been in place since 2015. So this is working very closely, again, with our industry in Canada, but to be able to inform the program and to deliver on it. So the goal here is mainly looking at the R&D gaps to bring the critical mineral resources to market and looking at new technologies to de-risk the various technical challenges. So we're focused on developing new processes and new technologies and providing made in Canada technological solutions that are both robust. I think they're performance-based, but they also ensure that they're environmentally sound and cost-effective. Reducing costs has been a major part of the technologies that we've been developing. We're making sure that the CapEx and OpEx levels are achievable for the industry in order to be able to advance towards production. And working very closely with regulatory counterparts to ensure that there's support there for as the industry advances, that the regulatory frameworks are in place in order to be able to ensure that the environment is protected with this emerging industry. And I'll talk a bit about that. So in terms of the upstream, so as we build the downstream side of things, we've been focused primarily on the upstream, looking at the deposits that we have and making sure that we have viable and economic flow sheets that are in place, and working very closely with a number of our stakeholders to be able to, whether it's looking at physical upgrading, reducing costs or increasing concentrations so that we can have reduce impurities and reduce costs ultimately. So we've been developing various different pieces of the value chains. In the chemical processing side, focus has been primarily on, again, reducing the costs, reducing environmental impacts, focused on the baking and cracking. I'll talk a bit about some of the results we've had there. Looking at impurity removal, making sure that we can manage the radioactivity piece, the removal of uranium, thorium, and ultimately looking at overall characterization and process chemistry fundamentally, but the environmental piece being the understanding the ecotoxicity in regards to the rare earth elements processing and also the rare earths themselves, as well as the waste management side of things. This is going forward for another year, and at the same time as we're starting to build the downstream. So what's happened so far is we've been able to produce a number of new novel technologies for either that can be applied throughout the flow sheets, whether they be at the baking cracking stage or at the beneficiation stage or ultimately in purity control. And I'm just trying to think, I have some of these in here. Some of the examples are we've developed some novel technologies around soaking. Rather than having cracking and baking, we've been able to look at dissolution mechanisms to be able to understand rare earth element decomposition far better than before, particularly for the Canadian minerals. And this has ultimately reduced operating costs and capital costs. We've been able to use new applications such as a supercritical fluid extraction, electrodialysis, to have cleaner and less costly ways in which we can extract rare earths, and ultimately reducing costs such as CapEx and OpEx for a number of these projects. As I said earlier, developing that rare earth element ecotoxicity knowledge in order to feed it right into our regulatory development through Environment Canada and Climate Change, Environment and Climate Change Canada. The other big piece that that's from the primary production. On the secondary production or secondary sources, we have another kind of complementary sister program called Mining Value from Waste. And this is focused not just on rare earths, but focused on looking at a number of critical minerals. So looking at secondary sources, not so much post-consumer waste at this point, but mainly secondary mineral sources, such as tailings, waste rock, or other types of mineral-based waste, and looking at upgrading those in order to recover the various different critical minerals. So we've worked on a number of rare earth element projects, either through uranium tailings or coal ash, but we also have critical mineral projects such as cobalt, platinum group elements, magnesium and scandium recovery, and as well as tungsten from a number of projects. I think currently right now we have 6 to 8 projects ongoing across the country looking at the secondary flow sheets for secondary source recovery. The other complementary program that's underway is the battery minerals R&D program. Very much, again, these dovetail together, looking at conventional and novel sources for battery minerals, whether they be lithium through lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel, vanadium, manganese, magnesium, and sodium. Those are looking at these focused areas in order to look at the sourcing with our counterparts in the Geological Survey of Canada, mineral characterization and geometallurgy, upgrading through beneficiation, flotation, and physical separation, and then ultimately into the battery chemicals through pyrometallurgy and electrometallurgy. We are doing some recycling, but with our sister labs in the federal family, and but the focus primarily is looking at primary and secondary sources. And in conclusion, I think, you know, with the way Canada is putting forward its critical mineral strategy, we feel that there's an opportunity now to capitalize on global demand and to be able to make sure that we can provide a secure and responsible value chain for critical minerals. We're looking at the integration between the permanent magnet value chains and the battery and electric vehicle value chains coming together. We're trying to focus on building the downstream while we advance the upstream and connecting those two pieces together. And working with both stakeholders in Canada and internationally is very much a part of our strategy going forward. So with that, I will conclude, and I'm not sure if there's any time for questions, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Janice. A very nice presentation, overall view of the Canadian aspect and various programs that our industry and junior members would be interested to look after. And thanks for the presentation. Is there any questions, either from panel or the attendees?
Just a very quick question, if I may, Nabeel. Thank you very much, Janice. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm curious, and I completely appreciate if it's too early to comment on it, but can you speak to how Canada is going about defining what are critical minerals in the nation?
We're taking a multi-pronged approach, as you can imagine. So we're looking at Canada primarily economic opportunities. So where are we strong already? Where do we see opportunities in terms of value change internationally? And where are also the strategic piece as well in terms of what is of strategic importance outside of the economic importance to Canada. So there are a number of pieces that we're looking at that kind of fit nicely in terms of matrix, whether it be on a competitive, strategic, competitive for Canada opportunity side, or it's competitive for Canada in terms of already a strong base that we have in place. So things that where Canada is already a major supplier, or where we see a major opportunity, or where we see something as being of a strategic importance for Canada going forward. Those are the main areas I think that we're focused on. So once the list is complete, the methodology will also be shared along with the list.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hi there. I was just wondering, do you know of any Canadian regulations or policies that would be supportive of rare earth element development?
So in terms of Canadian regulations, we don't necessarily have Canadian regulations that would be supportive of development. We have regulations that will manage the development of rare earth elements, but will be right now, because of COVID, we are somewhat delayed in advancing on the critical minerals strategy, but we see an opportunity for providing incentives in and around critical mineral development projects for Canada, and that I think will flee as we develop further and priorities are focused elsewhere, then we'll be able to advance in that regard. They're not specifically regulations, they're mainly I'd say programs. We have programs that are focused on clean technology, or focus on programs to advance in critical minerals, and those we'll see more and more as the strategy is finalized, that those programs will be unveiled.
Yep, thank you. And there is a general question, Janice, from the audience. Probably is one of the guy who is developing a project and asking a commercial market for mixed rare earth oxide in Canada or North America. So that's a pretty strong question, but is there a scope for that?
So is there a scope for a mixed rare earth oxide market in Canada? So I'd say the plan is, as we advance, the goal is to see that value chain in Canada. We're not there yet, but the goal is to see the full value chain and the pieces that will accompany that value chain established in Canada, or in Canada with partnership of other nations.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Janice. Then we are almost there. So if we have any further question, I will contact you by email or later if we have time. And then we have our next speaker from USA Rare Earths. They are one of the leading development project, Round Top in Texas, in partnership with Texas Minerals, and if I'm correct, and they have been advancing well. And recently, USA Rare Earth also bought, the manufacturing facility of the former Hitachi magnet manufacturing facility. So they are also trying to develop a full value chain in US and North America, and in partnership with several companies. So the US, the presentation will be given by Dan Mcgroarty. He's the board of director of the USA Rare Earth, and I welcome Dan. Dan, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Nabeel, and I apologize. I'm on audio only. Maybe I should follow Ryan's thought and invest a little more heavily in some of these devices that helps us, since we're all virtual all the time. I'm on the advisory board of USA Rare Earth, and quite right, Nabeel. Big picture, if I can just make a brief note, as I start. The urgency around these issues is increasing. If you have noticed in the last 24 to 48 hours, Chinese media has focused on the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, singling out Lockheed Martin for some sort of unspecified sanctions for modernizing defense missile system in Taiwan. One of the speculations in one of the Chinese media articles was that Lockheed Martin will find its rare earths cut off or discontinued in some way, as a result of this. So it underscores, I think, in real time, the vulnerability that is there, the urgency around what we're doing, and it's a message to all of us who are presenting here, but also participating in the webinar, that it's very important for us to continue and accelerate our efforts. A few brief points as I begin about Round Top and our supply chain strategy. Mines to magnets, which is a fairly often heard rhetorical flourish about what needs to be done in the rare earth space, but it's one we are working to operationalize quite literally across the full value chain, supply chain. Round Top's in Southwest Texas. It hosts a very unusual deposit, predominantly heavy rare earths, and I'm talking about maybe 70% of the rare earth representation there is heavy rare earths. It's almost a complete inversion of the typical, quite often rare earth projects having a dominant set of the light rare earths and a smaller percentage or ratio of the heavies. Round Top is just about the opposite of that. We have 15 of the 16 rare earths, leaving aside promethium. And this is important. We have 6 additional non-rare earth U.S. critical list metals and minerals in the deposit. It's a diversified geological portfolio, if you will, and that for us is a bit of insurance against, for instance, the pricing power that will remain in the hands of the Chinese for some time to come. The revenue implications for that are considerable. While the project is, and we often just, we describe it as a rare earth project or even a heavy rare earth project, about 1/3 of the projected revenue will come from rare earths. To be precise, that's actually a very conservative case. It's 8 rare earths that we specify in our commercial case. The rest we describe as warehoused, which is a kind of a clumsy term. They're available for future production as market interest would dictate. So about 1/3 of the revenue from the rare earths, about 1/3 from the Round Top lithium carbonate that we're going to derive from the Round Top deposit, and another 10% from aluminum sulfate. So if you look at the applications that the deposit supports, about 60% of the materials at Round Top have a clean tech or a green tech application. We've selected quite intentionally. We have a conservative operating rate with some upside, obviously, as we continue to develop and optimize the project. We have conservative recovery rates that we're positing and a conservative basket of commercial products. As I'm saying, we're not even monetizing, including in the preliminary economic estimates, the full range of rare earths, for instance. Very uniform distribution throughout the ore body, a low stripping ratio, basically no overburden there. And on the permitting side, Round Top happens to sit on Texas state land, not on federal land, as many other projects do. We have strong support from the Texas governor, who nominated Round Top for the federal high priority designation. And we've received significant investment. I think this is quite an important point for us, from the Navajo Nation, which has a transitional energy fund that looks at green tech and clean tech opportunities, and the Navajo Nation has chosen to invest. We have about a 30-month path through permitting and into production. That's the Round Top upstream deposit. We want to focus here for the purposes of this webinar on the supply chain. effort and the strategy we're pursuing there. The second link, of course, in our supply chain is the processing plant. We have recently stood up our processing pilot plant in Colorado, Wheat Ridge, Colorado. We're using CIX with continuous ion chromatography, and we've demonstrated the CIX method using a defense grant, Defense Logistics Agencies, with 3 rare earths assigned to us by DLA to high purity defined by DLA as 4 nines or 5 nines. We successfully completed that project. And then we've demonstrated the versatility of the CIX process on a second grant, government grant, a Department of Energy grant, with an unconventional feedstock, using coal overburden from a retired coal pit in Pennsylvania, where we successfully extracted 5 different rare earths. Our Colorado facility, which we're able to fit out and commence operations even during COVID, is going to allow us to optimize our approach. Moving to the next link, alloying, metal making, we're in discussions with various potential partners in the United States and in the United States National Lab Network. The national labs are really a national treasure in the United States, so we're quite interested in the work, the efforts we're making there to look at partnerships. Further downstream, the magnet facility, formerly owned and operated by Hitachi, was purchased by us in April. That's the facility in North Carolina. Ultimately, Round Top will be the upstream source of the material that moves through the chain and to the magnet facility. But we are actively looking at ways that we might resite and recommission that system nearer term. There are several options. Our preference would be collaborating with Hitachi. Industry interest is very strong. And with the conversations we're having with the US government, we are weighing what would be the best path forward, potentially even looking to recommission, recite and recommission within 12 months. And it may be that there is a national interest, a US national interest in bringing the magnet facility back online. And if there is, we're going to look at how to make that happen. So that, in a very brief snapshot, is our mine to magnet strategy that we're pursuing. A couple of other comments I'd like to share with the group. One goes to the asymmetry, if you will, in the space globally. The Chinese, proceeding with state-owned enterprises, a lot of government, continuous and constant government support, state-supported enterprises, and in the U.S. and in the other countries represented here among the participants, very much a market-driven approach, support from government taking different forms, but very, very asymmetric. From the point of view of USA Rare Earth, we're not dependent on government funding. We won't slow ourselves down to wait for government funding, but we will, of course, and we are, of course, looking at every funding opportunity in the US that comes out to see whether it's a good fit for us. And if there is, we will respond. We're making every effort to align ourselves with the policy priorities of the US and our US allies, but we know that our success as a project is determined by the commercial markets. And in fact, we know from our interactions with the US government that commercial viability is really key. There's no desire on the government part that we're seeing to have to prop up a rare earth provider that's not otherwise commercially viable. And we're not looking for a codependent relationship. So as I close, I want to focus on another factor that's been present here in the conversation today, and I really think that has to drive the approach. It certainly drives the leadership of USA Rare Earth. In a single word, collaboration. And I mean that more than just a talking point. With the United States rare earth sector at 0 in terms of rare earth oxide production, there's room, obviously, we think, for more than one entrant. In terms of the expanded NTIB, the US-Australia government-to-government relationship, and as I'll note in a minute, the US-Canada collaboration too. Janice talked about that. In fact, our Round Top JV has been collaborative from the start with Australian and US investors. In late 2019, we and Arafura, I think they're on the call today also, on the webinar today also, agreed to collaborate around separation of their SEG to heavy concentrate at our pilot facility in Colorado. And this morning on the news wires, we have on the US-Canada collaboration front, we announced a letter of interest with Geomega Resources focused on recapturing, recycling the swarf from the magnet production process So that's a commitment to sound economics and sustainable practice. Closing, I'm a transplanted Marylander, and I learned a saying here, a warning about our bay crabs in a bucket. If you watch them, just about the time that any one crab gets to the top of the bucket to get out, another crab grabs it and pulls it back in. None of them get out. Now, if they all linked claws, they'd all get out of the bucket. We can't, as an industry, be like the Maryland crabs and all stay stuck in the bucket. So we are open to collaboration as we process with our CIX system and its versatility, looking at different feedstocks. Certainly, as we look to partner for alloying and metal making, and as we are with Geomega, as we scope out recommissioning the magnet facility, where collaboration makes sense, where it moves both partners forward, where it aligns with our mine to magnet strategy, we're open, we're interested. And I hope after today's session, we'll be hearing from some of you. Thanks for the great session, and thanks for this opportunity to contribute.
Yep. Thank Dan. A very comprehensive update on the project as well as the general trend in the North America and what is happening in China, Taiwan. Thanks a lot. Is there any questions from the panelists or from the audience? And for your information, yes, Arafura, the members from Arafura and Geomega are in this webinar. So that's good that you are partnering with them as well. Yep. Any questions?
Yes, I would have a question. Thomas from Ginger in Singapore. How much rare earth oxide do Lockheed buy, if any?
Yeah, Thomas, the articles that were published on this make it sound as if the oxide is shipped off to Fort Worth, Texas, to the Lockheed plant manufacturing facility there. We know it's a different story. One, I suspect that these the rare earths are. I know that the rare earths would be entering the Lockheed chain as they would for any prime defense contractor through many tiers of development that would be embedded into the various piece parts that go into the final product. So you're absolutely right in your thinking on that score. And secondly, the overall volume of rare earths, while it is sometimes reported in regard to one U.S. defense platform or another, obviously those figures aren't disclosed. And I will say that even some of them that are reported in the public, I would say they may or may not be accurate, and the government, U.S. government, will never correct them one way or another. So I would say this: the rare earth, in terms of volume for defense uses, the volume is very, very small. In terms of the functionality of the system, the requirements are acute. They're absolutely essential. So volume is small. The need is acute. It's going to be a niche market, but an important one. But I go back to my point that if you're not commercially viable, you won't be there to potentially supply defense sector in any event. So you have to be commercially viable as well.
Yeah, and that brings me to the next question. Looking at the round top, the relative composition of rare earth oxides contained, are you sure that you can be commercially viable without, say, tariff protection?
Yeah, I think it goes to the point that I was trying to make in a rather abbreviated form, obviously, that one of the advantages that we have, it is a concern, but one of the advantages that we have is that the rare earths as a whole look for us to be providing about 1/3 of the revenue coming out of the deposit. So we have the diversification that comes from that comes from other metals and minerals being key to our commercial case. We also think I think that's probably a big part of it. The space is obviously going to evolve. The points that Ryan was making about we have quite a bit of DY and TB. The points that Ryan was making are very relevant there because we know that's very price sensitive, but it's also supply sensitive. And so we think we can change the equation there. We're pretty hopeful just because of the geological mix that we've got, not just within the rare earths, but beyond the rare earths to the other critical minerals in the deposit.
Clear. I mean, the products that we need to worry least about are TB and DY. But if I look at 44% being yttrium of the composition, and if I look at, say, the teaser from Texas Minerals that anticipates that they can catch 22% of the world lutetium market, that says that there are significant risks involved, because obviously you don't grab 22% market share at current prices.
Yeah, there's not a lot of lutetium potential or outside of China, which is where we're looking at that. And the point about yttrium would be 44% of the deposit, and again, the rare earths being 1/3 of the overall revenue for the resource. The optimization work that we're doing in Colorado is really key here, because we've taken a very conservative approach to the recoveries thus far. And that means that anything that we have that starts to report in above those rather conservative recoveries is going to help the commercial case. So, you know, look, it's those are all the decisions that that we're going to be making. We're focusing first on the 8 specific rare earths that we're including in the commercial case. You know, we haven't even talked about some of the other rare earths, or I haven't talked about here some of the other rare earths that would be relevant in terms of evolving applications like 5G. Haven't talked about some of the ones that might be changing in terms of the effort to reshore medical device manufacture to the US, those kinds of things. We haven't even tried to freeze frame or snapshot how those are going to affect us. But we'll be looking at all those issues that you point out.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And is any questions for Dan or in general? You can ask now the questions to the all other panelists. Okay, I also got a few questions in the chat box. One is for Reinout. Reinout, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, one participant asked how the downstream sector is, what do you mean by the decarbonization effort? And how can this be measured and made public? And the participants say that most companies won't do that. So how you measure it, and what is the decarbonization mean for the downstream industry?
Yeah, so basically, wherever you are in the value chain, you have a certain carbon footprint. So decarbonization as a first, before you can decarbonize, you need to measure your current footprint, of course. And then you can, depending on where your footprint is laying, you can start decarbonizing it, switching to alternative energy fuels, for example, other ways of logistic solutions. So that's decarbonizing the value chain. So every player within the value chain will somehow be faced with it. Certainly, if, for example, in the future, a carbon tax would come into play.
Yep. Okay. And Ryan, was there a question? I think one of your figure mentioned that there will be a dip in the passenger EV sales in 2023. What is that reason? You have some explanation to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll just circle back to the slide to see exactly what you're referring to. Not quite sure it was a dip per se. Are you referring to the chart that shows demand?
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, so global, yeah, I see what you're saying. Oh, so please repeat the question there, Nabeel.
It's saying that in 2023, there will be a mini dip in the passenger EV sales numbers.
Yes, okay. Correct? Yeah. In that chart is not showing passenger EV sales, but it's showing passenger vehicle sales. So there is a slight dip in 2023, and what that reflects is not so much a dip in the market going forward, but kind of a correction of the market following the rebound that we expect in 2021 and 2022. So to rephrase that slightly, because we expect this big drop in demand or in sales rather in 2020 this year, we think a lot of that demand is being kicked down the road, being deferred until 2021 and 2022, which will result in a bit of a spike in passenger vehicle sales. And as that spike fades away, as that demand kind of is satisfied, we'll return back to normal levels in 2023, which are slightly lower, and thereafter grow through 2030. So I think having the chart on the screen would be ideal, but hopefully that explanation gives a bit of credence to what we're expecting.
Yeah, and a couple of our speakers also mentioned about recycling, and one of the participants asked, maybe Badri also mentioned about traceability. And many of the downstream players are interested in the traceability of the rare earths. But he's asking, how will recycled rare earths and other material going to be made traceable? So,
yeah,
so
that's
it's not in the connecting. Yeah,
that's absolutely a major challenge going forward, and I think it's a far out challenge, given that we don't really anticipate major commercial volumes of recycled rare earth materials to be coming into the market within the next decade. If I could clarify on that response that I gave earlier with respect to recycling, we absolutely do consider the swarf that so the filings and the cuttings and the waste that is produced when going from, let's say, a neodymium iron boron alloy block to the final individual magnets. So we absolutely consider the recovery of that swarf material, which has a very high recovery rate and generally just feeds straight back into the market. But when it comes to end-of-life devices, we foresee that being a challenge over the next decade. Not to say it won't play a role, but it's going to be relatively insignificant versus primary mine supply. And yeah, with respect to traceability, I think the jury is out on just how that issue can be resolved. When we have one central source of supply globally, one dominant source of supply that also tends to be a fairly opaque region, that presents a lot of challenges with creating traceability systems. Obviously, there's infrastructure in place like blockchain, etc. However, I think there needs to be built-in trust that the roots of that chain are legitimate for kind of all of the subsequent reporting after to have any kind of validity.
Yeah, yeah, Andrew, you want to raise a question?
Hi there. What I was wondering, especially with regards to Janice Zinck, is what would it take for I mean, for Canada, on a Canada perspective, is, you know, there's been a recent push for mining tailings to see whether you can get rare earth elements out of uranium tailings. And I'm based out here in Saskatchewan, where we have tons of uranium deposits and things like that. So there's been a push to see whether we can get rare earth elements from tailings. Is that something that would be worthwhile in the supply chain or value chain, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very much a big supporter of looking at secondary sources for the rare earths. The uranium tailings is probably the best source for rare earths in Canada from secondary sources. We've done a study recently that is available for anyone if they're interested on looking at the quantities of rare earths elements in the various different secondary sources. Of course, the one that topped the list was uranium tailings. And relatively, we feel that the technology would not be too complex to be able to do the extraction cost effectively.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, is there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Yes, Eric Clear here. So, you know, you guys have talked a lot, your organization has talked a lot about upstream and midstream and end-of-life recycling, but it seems to me that there's a big piece missing, and that's the actual production of goods, semi-finished or finished goods that use rare earths. My observation is that most of that's happening in China. So how can you expect to control this circular economy without that piece of the puzzle? Shouldn't we be trying to foster manufacturing of goods that contain rare earths, new goods, etc., outside of China? Or am I missing something? Thank you.
We want to answer that one.
Sure, I'll take a stab.
Yeah.
I think we certainly should be. I think when we look at completing an alternative supply chain, that cannot be done without having that most downstream manufacturing end of things. Yeah, ultimately the challenge is really just the chicken before the egg. There's many different pieces of the supply chain that need to be established and co-linked together. And the challenge is determining which one of these links should be prioritized first, or which links should be prioritized first in order to incentivize investment and development, either up or downstream. It's been a pervasive challenge over the last decade that I think has really kept a lot of investors on the sideline and kept a lot of these otherwise promising development projects from kind of reaching fruition. So most definitely there should not solely be a focus on getting new holes in the ground and trying to process that material. Canada, the US, Europe, and other nations should be equally concerned with ensuring that they continue to hold a role at that most downstream end of the value chain, where they're developing new high tech and new patents and new commercial uses of rare earths. Otherwise, we most definitely always will be reliant on China or potentially Japan for filling in the gaps of the circular supply chains that we try to establish elsewhere.
And thank you all the panelists for joining. And Rob, now I invite Rob Koppelman, he's our treasurer of REIA, to give a final words and vote of thanks on behalf of REIA.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It was a pleasure having you all available and sharing your thoughts and the things you're working on. I believe that we have seen a variety of incentives that have been taken in order to make this market even more grown up and become more the market that we need to have worldwide in order to find the demand met in one way or the other. And I would like to thank all the participants that have contributed to it, and I do hope to see you in a next webinar or meeting with REIA soon. Thank you, Nabeel.
Yeah, thank you all panelists and the participant. And I would send you the presentation slides to all the participants, and also a video recording of the program. And thank you all. Bye bye, and see you soon in our next program. Bye and take care.